All right. Welcome, everyone, to this very exciting webinar between Funraise and Point, a new friend and partner to Funraise. Madison, thank you so much for joining the webinar to share more about our partnership. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. If you hear me
Absolutely.
hacking, everyone, I'm sorry.
Couple young kids keeping you sick, right? We know how
Oh,
that goes. All the parents out there know how that goes. Well, I hope you feel better, and even more so, thank you for joining while feeling under the weather. Um, so for those tuning in, we have customers of Funraise, customers of Point, prospects of both Point and Funraise, and so I thought it'd just be a great opportunity to kind of start with an introduction, both of us being able to introduce our companies to our nonprofit friends. And so, Madison, if you wouldn't mind starting, we'd love to hear sort of, as the CEO and founder of Point, we'd love to hear sort of like your startup story and what led you to start Point and what is Point.
yeah. Well, thanks for having us. Thanks for having me. Point is one of the best volunteer management platforms out there. I like to say, if you can picture Eventbrite and Salesforce having a baby for nonprofit management, volunteer management, then you can picture Point. We started Point years and years ago. We started actually as a volunteer app, and we had so many requests from nonprofits begging us, saying, "Thank you for helping us recruit volunteers, but we have this massive, messy management problem. Could you help us smooth that out?" And digging deeper, we found that nonprofits of all sizes, small to large, were just hacking together tools to smooth out that volunteer journey from recruiting volunteers all the way to reporting and management. It was all messy. They were using like 5 different tools to try to accomplish again that like volunteer management journey. And we thought, okay, if we can do this, we can make it easy. So we've been doing that for a while now, and we're really thankful to have just gotten to this point now that we are working with donor management tools and now syncing those platforms together. So it's not just about the volunteer management experience and the volunteer journey, but now really this view of like holistic supporter impact and how that supporter, whether they're volunteering or donating, can be looked at in one large journey together.
Very cool. I'm really excited to talk about sort of the kind of volunteer pipeline, which I know we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But why that's exciting to me and to Funraise is like part of our strategic focus in this year is really to ensure, and just taking maybe one step back real quick before I jump into that, is the Funraise platform is an end-to-end donor management and giving platform. So we service nonprofits of all sizes. I'd say, kind of core nonprofit, 1 to 5 million, really thrives on sort of the Funraise platform. And one of the things as we were going into this year, thinking about what else could we do to enhance our donor CRM, our donor management software. And one of the requests we heard a lot from our customers was just this questions around volunteer management, right? How can we get more of a perspective, specifically on donors who are volunteering or volunteers who could be potential donors. And so this is why I'm so excited about our partnership, because we're bringing the best of breed of two companies together to service the nonprofit community, which I think is going to add a lot of value to nonprofits. And so very excited about that. For those tuning in and listening, and I imagine we kind of have nonprofits across the spectrum as it relates to volunteer management programs. Maybe some, just dipping their toes in it. Others, have full-fledged programs and are very well operationalized. And maybe others who are just considering, does this make sense for us? And so maybe taking a step back on that and asking, what does the volunteer economy look like for nonprofits? From your point of view, how big of an opportunity is volunteerism for nonprofits? And maybe could you help us understand sort of just the market in general?
You know what? Volunteer programs are really this unicorn kind of phenomenon. Whether your nonprofit is tiny or whether your nonprofit is really large, it doesn't really have a major indicator of whether you can create a healthy volunteer program. We have some very small, very lean nonprofits that are running these super robust volunteer programs that kind of again, lead into this pipeline to gifts and donations down the road that can contribute to the growth of the nonprofit. In the volunteer workforce, if you're able to manage people well, you're able to grow that program and grow that impact and grow that aspect of your mission and your offering as a nonprofit. So whether you are a food pantry or whether you are a YMCA conglomerate, your programs could be at the same starting point. And it really just comes down to people management. And it's the beauty and the beast of volunteer management, right? There's so much opportunity to add that volunteer workforce to your nonprofit's mission, and then also kind of uncover this potential pipeline for donors in the future.
What are some of the and this might be a bit on the spot, so I apologize. Not on our list of questions, but what are some of the most common? Is there a common type of nonprofit that really leverages volunteering as like a program that really enables and accelerates an organization's mission?
If you are a community-based entity, if you're running one of those cornerstone community offerings like food pantry, free clinic, clothing stores. Those are the typical entities that thrive with volunteer programs, right? But we know that those programs have been suffering since COVID to recover a really strong volunteer base that is not based on senior volunteers. So if you are running one of those types of programs and have been kind of spinning your wheels for the past 4 or 5 years on how to create legacy within those programs, we understand that. But the volunteer world, when it comes to like breaking down the lens of what's a good fit for a volunteer program, it's not necessarily cause specific, but rather looking at your nonprofit and understanding, are there tasks that can be separated out that can be good projects? If you're able to kind of time box and create those actionable tasks, then you're a good fit for a volunteer program. You could be a Crohn's and Colitis Foundation that does mentorships one-on-one. You could be environmental organization, which we know that Gen Z is clamoring for. They're almost always maxed out in terms of like volunteer lists. Your organization, again, if you can divide your workload, you can create opportunities for volunteers to enter your organization.
Got it. Yeah, bringing up Gen Z, sparked just a question around, what are you seeing across sort of like your customer base in terms of volunteer age? Is there a specific demographic of individuals that lean more towards volunteering with organizations over another, or is it pretty diverse?
Yeah, I think that if you want to kind of segment your supporter database and kind of identify the people that are best suited or best ready to jump in as volunteers, you can kind of create a couple categories. Senior 65 age and older, this is like your super volunteer range. This group exhibits really high volunteer rates. 22% are volunteering in the past year, and nearly like 8% of those are volunteering daily.
Wow.
So you really want to engage those volunteers through those volunteer activities, but also like when you look at a supporter timeline and pipeline, you're going to also want to engage those individuals for major gifts. Adults 45 through 54, especially women, are active as ongoing volunteers. So you want to make sure your volunteer coordinators are engaging this group, segmenting this group out, and you're also partnering as an organization with your different departments within the nonprofit. So you're bringing in your development teams, you're bringing in your marketing teams, you're bringing in the volunteer coordinator to sit at the table and say, how can we encourage these individuals to give time and money, because they do want to give their time, and they're volunteering somewhere. And if they're not volunteering with you, where are they volunteering at? So, and as a note, even if these individuals in that age range, like age 45 through 54, are higher income individuals that you're flagging to be maybe a major gifts donor, those individuals that are in that high income bracket are actually the ones that are volunteering the most. So
Wow.
you shouldn't be nervous to ask for that gift from that high net worth individual. Again, especially if it's a woman, because they want to be giving that time.
Hmm.
Um, and moving down kind of this like segmentation breakdown, younger professionals, you don't want to be begging them for their time. They're not walking in through volunteer programs unless it's through a corporate group. So if you want to do a campaign for corporate volunteering and corporate matching donations, that's a good coupling to do. And then if you're having opportunity for high school students, specifically age 16 through 17, to have an introduction with your organization, that's a great target age to get them. They need those requirements. Um, it's a really good idea if you have the capacity as an organization to make that entry point for them, to create affinity with your brand that can, carry on into their professional life and adulthood. So um, I know that's a very long-winded answer to that question, but segmenting your supporters into those categories that statistically are, you know, volunteering the most is a really, really good way to create a good relationship, and also sketch out that pathway for donation asks or conversions.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, before starting Funraise and running a couple nonprofits, we never had any like volunteer official volunteer programs. But often, what we would get from major donors, and actually, in that sort of like the older demographic that you were describing in particular, would always ask like, "What more can I do?" Right? So like after their initial donation, and so I always had like the context of like, okay, a major donor, highly bought into the mission of the organization, and their sort of like next way to get more involved hands on is some sort of like volunteer
Right.
activity that's going to draw them even more into the mission. But I think what's interesting with what you've built is you've built a pipeline of volunteers through your software that nonprofits are using that maybe have never donated to the organization but have donated time.
Right.
And so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on sort of how nonprofits think about sort of volunteers who've never made a financial donation before, and how they work that into their pipeline. Because
Yeah.
you and I have talked in the past as well about often the volunteer coordinator is not the same as like the advancement or the development manager and coordinator. So these are two separate roles managing
Right.
different sort of parts of the business. So just kind of would be curious to hear your perspective on just the opportunity that nonprofits have with volunteers who've never made a financial donation before.
Right. I think some of the most successful nonprofits that work from that like volunteer to donor conversion, those two people that you were just talking about, the volunteer coordinator and the development coordinator, they are working as a team. They're working side by side. They're using volunteers as, again, that pipeline into that donation pathway. It's not segmented. It's not like, hey, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, good luck. Um, and I think that if you're able to dream up those two individuals, kind of the pathway of support, that happy path, that dream path of support, that you want each kind of segment of your volunteers to take together, I think that's a really, really strategic way to handle things. I think if you're trying to create like a tactic to help gain momentum to convert the volunteers into donors, you need to do two things. First, you need to create a really clear connection and appreciation in the volunteer experience. So when you're crafting a volunteer program, we can get into that. Those are the two most important things. And then secondly, when you're trying to create that ask for that conversion, the volunteer to donor conversion, you want to create a very clear and accessible donation ask. And as a bonus, if your ask ties into the volunteer experience, we found in the past with our tests that volunteer is 4 times more likely to give if it is an itemized ask that is built into the experience.
So when you say built into the experience, like unpack that for me. What do you mean by like, yeah, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's like, say you are a volunteer and you've been helping in the community kitchen all day. The shift ends, and the shift leader, the super volunteer, or the admin says, hey, thank you so much for your time today. You guys were amazing. We did this, explaining the impact, and say, hey, you might have noticed our oven is a piece of shit and we'd really like to replace it. We've got, it's $30,000 for us to do that. Here is our QR code or our text to give. Could you guys give $20 on the spot or $50, whatever you feel called or want to give today? If not, thank you for your time, but we just wanted to let you know that we're trying to do this.
I see. So it's literally baked into the
Yeah.
actual physical experience of volunteering. You
Yes.
know, after you've seen sort of the impact that this organization is making with the help of your efforts as a volunteer, the iron is hot. Strike
It is.
then,
It is.
and that a volunteer even more engaged.
Yeah. And if the ask is informal and if it's clear and if the pathway to give is easy, if it's a text to give, it's a QR code, it's a Venmo, it's a something, that is a really likely conversion. And if that doesn't happen in the experience itself, doing those quick follow-ups that tie into that experience through an email marketing campaign or text campaign, that is also a really great tie-in. But also, if you are trying to target these individuals later on, a few months down the line for that campaign, don't just bake them into your regular asks. Segment them out. Thank you for their time. Thank them for their time earlier, prior that year, and just say, hey, we're wanting to expand this program or something like that. Tie it into the experience that they had so they feel like they're building upon the impact. You want to make sure that they feel like their time and their money is building towards something.
Hmm.
And so you just don't want to fold them into a regular campaign ask.
Yeah.
Treat them as different, treat them as special. And that's the power, right, of bringing in volunteer information into a donor CRM and giving tools like Funraise. That's the power. It's the segmentation, it's the marketing. And I think a lot of nonprofits make this assumption that volunteers will just turn into donors naturally. They are very likely to, they're 10 times more likely to, but they are probably not unless you ask them. And,
Yeah. Like the golden rule for like fundraising is no one's going to give unless you ask,
right,
including volunteer, which is
right,
very interesting. You know, that the stat that you just threw out, like, is 10x more likely to donate, which is all the more reason to have a strategic ask. You know,
right,
like you said at the end. One of the things that I'm excited about is being able to see some of this data sort of in the Funraise platform, like the amount of hours an individuals volunteered, what programs they volunteered with, and so forth. And I think fundraising point customers can do really interesting things with this data. You talked about sort of like the direct ask for that, that hypothetical shitty oven, right?
right,
Where my brain goes is like, well, you had 10 or 15 volunteers, you asked people to give like $20, great. Well, what if you also ask that individual to create a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign specifically for this $30,000 oven, right?
right,
Because what we also know is that one peer-to-peer fundraiser usually brings in 5 to 6 new donors to an organization. And so
right,
now you have this like volunteer turned donor turned fundraiser, all because of their initial kind of interaction with the
right,
organization was helping advance the organization's mission through volunteering. So I'm
right.
really excited about sort of the compound effect that an organization can, or the compound impact an organization will receive from a single person as they understand sort of the depth of their involvement with the organization, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I think that if development coordinators are being really smart with this information and this integration, they will do things like that, right? They're going to say, hey, if someone is fired up on the spot, can we ask them to do that campaign? And I think it just takes that level of intentionality to have that huge scale effect. I know that as a nonprofit, you're sitting here thinking, okay, cool, you're asking for an itemized thing, but that's not helping overhead or X, Y, and Z. Just remember that you want to get people into your supporter pipeline, into your donation pipeline. So think of this as the first step. Think of that initial ask as the first step, and then move them into your other campaigns later on. And I think that if we're willing to again segment those smaller asks and those experience ties at first, you're going to see a much healthier pipeline when it comes to those overhead larger campaigns.
Very cool. In going back to Point Software, what are some of the most common use cases that you guys are serving today, as it just relates to volunteer projects?
Yeah, I think if you're managing your people power, your operational day to days with volunteers that need shift breakdown, qualified self registration flows. If you need help onboarding volunteers through application processes, or smooth out your background checks so that you are not having to have HR and your volunteer coordinator go back and forth 1,000 times to make sure that people are qualified to volunteer. Those are all really great cases for using Points platform. Again, whether that is through the management of data, the recruitment of volunteers, we have a beautiful recruitment widgets that you can use on your websites, or again, that onboarding process and qualification process of volunteers. There is a portion that you can use for anyone. We know that not all nonprofits need to recruit volunteers, but when you need to recruit volunteers, you need a really great tool for it. But managing that people data and keeping everything separate and making sure everything is qualified should be a standard across the board for all of our nonprofits.
Very cool. One of the metrics I'm really looking forward to track between Funraise and Point is how many hours does it take uh, before a volunteer turns into a donor.
Yeah.
And maybe you have like some like initial idea on sort of what that might be, but that's something I'm excited to track and to follow, because as organizations are looking to diversify their fundraising, especially in times like we're living today, where a lot of funding has been either permanently frozen or is uncertain. It's tapping into new revenue streams is becoming more and more important. And so, as organizations who are building or have built volunteer programs, it'd be really interesting to kind of track that. Do you have any high level insight around sort of what it takes to convert a volunteer to a donor? We know that they're 10x more likely to give,
Yeah.
but any idea sort of how long it takes for that person to actually be engaged on the giving level?
We don't have enough data to know when the asks are, right? Are we doing consistent follow up in the experience, like I mentioned first? When is that ask coming? Is it a week after? Is it a month after? Are you just looping them into your end of year campaigns? Are you segmenting out volunteers? This idea of the full supporter life cycle is really just, I think, as an industry, we're just touching the surface of it. And I think there's a couple reasons that's happened, right? Is one, we have all in one tools that do donor management and volunteer management all in one. Often those tools are not robust on both sides. So having two expert platforms that do each and that are working together, this is kind of a new era for our nonprofit industry as a whole. And I think that we will uncover a lot of insights as we go along, just as a sector, as a nonprofit tech sector.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point, and why we're so excited to be partnering with Point. Just a super robust platform for nonprofits managing volunteer programs at scale or just beginning. I think is really exciting, and being able to see that data within like the Funraise database for fundraisers to be able to generate new appeals, generate new demographics of potential donors as it relates to volunteering, I think is just a really powerful way to bring two really great companies together in partnership for the greater good of advancing the mission of our nonprofit customers. And so, very excited to see how the partnership goes. We're very excited to be working with you and the team on the integration and going to market to share all about sort of what that's going to entail. And so, thank you, Madison, so much for the great partnership. For those listening and are interested in learning more about Point, we'll make sure to drop information directly below the video so you can learn more about Point if you're interested in checking out Madison's company to manage your volunteer needs. And likewise, with Funraise, you can learn more about Funraise in the link below the video. Madison, anything else that I missed on that I should have asked that I didn't ask before we wrap up here today?
I think that covers it. I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about how you as nonprofits will take this data, the combined power of these platforms, and segment out and further your mission to just make more personalized relationships, right? Like at the end of the day, your supporters are your relationships, and we want to help steward those better. We want to help you maintain those. We want to help grow your missions. And this is our way of helping you do that. And bring your teams together closer. Your volunteer coordinators, your development coordinators, like we're excited to see how you partner using our platforms.
Absolutely. I'm excited to see how the teams do collaborate and come up with new strategies to drive more donations for the organization. So it's going to be fun to watch that unfold as we deepen our partnership. Madison, thank you so much for joining the webinar today. Appreciate it and look forward
Sure.
to many good things to come.